Europe builds and builds well.
We have the founders and the stories to prove it.
I'm Mathilda Nathan, founder of Born.
And I'm Niko Efstathiou, journalist and author.
And together we will be co-hosting some of Europe's greatest founders in Europe Builds.
Scaling challenges, fundraising strategies, diverse cultures, and the art of storytelling. Join us as we explore some tough topics with candor and detail. We have with us Anton Derlyatka, co-founder and CEO of Sweatcoin and Sweat Economy, which is a global health and wellness company that incentivizes people, as you already said, to become more active by rewarding them for the steps that they take. Anton is an entrepreneur. He's also an investor. He's also been a manager. He has many years of experience. And aptly, for someone who has a wellness company, he's also quite fit and loves to exercise, right? So, Anton, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right, so we always start. I mean, I said a few words about what you do, but we always start with an elevator pitch where, we ask the typical question of how would you describe yourself and what you've built in under 3 minutes? Because of what you've done, I think let's not call it an elevator pitch, but sort of a sprint pitch. What would you say when you're running with someone else for a 3-minute jog into the office about who you are and what you have built in the past couple of years?
Yeah, good one. I'll probably try to do it in 1 minute. So there's a couple of, big statements there. The first statement is physical activity is valuable, literally. And that's the insight that we build the company on. And the way our mission is to make lots of people, 1 billion people around the world, more physically active. Be active every day. To develop a healthy habit of being physically active. And the way we do it is we use a combination of providing incentives, i.e. literally paying people for being active, and gamifying the activity. So incentives is pretty unique. Think of air miles for steps. Gamification applied to the right underlying behavior is also getting lots of traction. Lots of people heard about Duolingo. That is doing something wonderful for language learning. So from that perspective, there's no reason why you cannot apply gamification for something that's even more valuable to you, and that is being physically active. About 70% of the world population, they sedentary. They do not have the benefit of being physically active, and that number is growing. So it's a big issue. We are all taking the risk of becoming, and there's this, cartoon film Wall-E. People who are not moving around, they're just moving around in capsules. We don't want that. Most of technology actually makes us even more sedentary because we are lazy by design. We are slaves to convenience. We want to reverse the trend, and that's why we've created Sweatcoin, which essentially makes you physically active through a combination of rewards and gamification.
I'm actually very curious with the motivation that the Sweatcoin is giving. Like, do you have an estimate of how much more steps someone is actually doing because of this external motivation, if you like?
So on average, the free product gives about 20% uplift in physical activity. But this is like average. And averages are very, very wrong, always. So directionally, it gives you plus 20%, like 19.5, if I'm precise. But in other cases, for example, we work with the NHS in the UK, which is the National Healthcare Service, free healthcare for all. And by the way, an interesting fact, 11% of the total NHS budget is spent on diabetes 2 alone. So diabetes type 2 is absolutely massive. That's the single biggest spend line for the NHS. Now, the best way to prevent people from developing diabetes 2, when they're in the pre-diabetic state. So pre-diabetic state is when you're about to develop diabetes. So when you're in pre-diabetic state, then the best way to, drag you from the edge of the cliff is to A, to make you more physically active, and B, to start making, for you to have a better diet. Mm-hmm. So the NHS, they put together what they call the National Diabetes Prevention Program, NDPP. And people that are going through that program are supposed to kind of learn more and become more active. The problem with the program is that only 25% of pre-diabetic patients complete it. Sure. Which means that the remainder, 75%, they develop diabetes 2 with a probability close to 1. Now, when we work with them, essentially Sweatcoin becomes an engagement platform that makes those patients more physically active. The completion rate goes up from 25% to 89%, which is a massive improvement. And those users, the subset of users who are on that program, they become 45% more active. And they lose about 6% of their body weight in 10 weeks. So I think that's a long answer to your question. It depends very much on the type of profile you have, on how much you're moving, and how important that is for you to change that behavior.
Well, it must be very interesting.
Some people become like 100% more active. There are some people, and we know it because we get those letters almost every day. There was this early user of ours who sent us a long letter saying that, look, guys, I mean, I know exactly where my life changed completely. And that moment is when I installed the app Sweatcoin, because I was in that wheelchair and I knew that I would never, ever be able to walk freely for the rest of my life. And then this was the thing that made me get out of my wheelchair, start walking with a stick initially. First day 50 steps, then 100 steps. And now this guy, luckily his condition has improved because he managed to maintain that level of activity. He wasn't trying to run a marathon straight away. He wasn't trying to do something that was extremely stressful for his body. He started with the lowest common denominator of physical activity, which is walking, which is available to 99% of the world population. And gradually he built up that strength and stamina. And right now he walks, tens of thousands of steps daily.
So I think
That's
a very
impressive.
integral part of why this is super important, what you're describing, and can have such a success, is the gamification aspect to it, right? Because that can sort of get you out of your wheelchair, get you out of your sofa, as you're explaining, how it's linked with data too, so you can set these goals. Those are, I think, like integral parts of a successful, like incentivizing product, right? And yours has been clearly successful. I mean, you've had a lot of experience in building ultra high growth consumer products. I think last time I checked, you must have had over 150 million registered users. Am I correct in saying that figure?
Correct, yes.
So tell us a little bit about that journey. How did something like Sweatcoin sort of start gaining the loyalty of users, and what does ultra growth actually mean? Like, what are the numbers like when we're really talking about ultra high growth?
Yeah, look, a good one. It probably requires a long conversation, maybe even a book, even though I would never probably want to write a book. But look, I mean, you all start with testing a certain basic hypothesis, and the hypothesis was there, like, okay, what if we build something that is essentially like rewards people for being active? And then the next question was, okay, fine, suppose we build it. But what would that, all right, we issue you with coins, then what? Then the next question is, okay, there's got to be something that you can exchange your coins into. So where do you get that products that would be available for Sweatcoins? And then you try to solve that question. And that question comes usually because, usually you just start looking in friends and family and people who actually just like your product. And our very first set of partners was just 12 companies. And some of them were just a friend of ours who is a prominent businessman who owns one of the top, niche but very popular sports shoe manufacturers. And he said, look, guys, I really, really love what you do. That's a great idea. I'll give you 100 pairs of sneakers, and those will come from the last year's collection, and feel free to make them available to your user base. And some other people, there was a guy who owned a pizzeria just next to our house, to our office. And he said, what, whoever comes in and pays me 20 Sweatcoins, I'm going to be very happy to give them a pizza margarita. So, I mean, you start somewhere, and then all of a sudden you get a little bit of traction, and that takes you to the next level, and then you get more traction. And because of the way we designed it, all of a sudden we got lots of users who came in, they really liked the promise. And because we had lots of users, some brands became very interested. And we had this arrangement that brands do not have to pay us anything. They need to provide free product that we would then just pass on to our users, and users loved it. And they would stick around even more, and there would be even more of them coming to the platform. So essentially a classic definition of a network effect. And then at some point in time, we just realized that some of those partners, that we call them vendors, the companies that would, showcase the products on the platform, they started queuing. They're literally, can we actually get on the marketplace like next month rather than, in 2 months or 3 months? And we go, you know what, it's already busy. There's a queue there. And this is where we just realized that this is a monetization opportunity. And one thing led to another. So you keep on iterating. You try to keep your eyes open. Try to ask questions, why it's working, why it's not working. And then you just go step by step.
Honestly, the more I hear you talking, the more questions I have about this ultra high growth kind of product or offering, I should say. I'm very curious, what have been kind of the key ingredients that kind of helped you build a machine?
Yeah, it's a great question. So firstly, I think that we did really, really well that we created essentially a built-in referral system, which creates that process of inviting a friend, a very integral part of user experience. Most companies, they go like, all right, your kind of referral system is like an add-on. Here's the product, you're enjoying it. And by the way, if you introduce a friend, you'll get whatever, a £5 voucher or a bunch of points or a badge or something. But that reward is not necessarily integral to the user experience itself. In our case, the whole point of view being more active was to earn Sweatcoins. And when people would land on their today screen, which is the main screen, the first screen they see when they install the app, you have a zero balance. And the only two ways for you to start growing that balance would be either to start walking or invite a friend, in which case you would get 5 Sweatcoins. So I think that one was the very first step for us to start building something. So we've created quite a lot of that virality. So the user-to-user invite loop, which was creating lots of free users for us. In and by itself, it wasn't enough to just, create a growth engine like we are. The growth engine that we have today, currently with extremely low budgets, generates, onboards anywhere between 70 and 100,000 registered users daily, every day. But then again, that is impossible without having a very strong in-app virality. However, the in-app virality is not the only thing that makes it work. So the other big element there is that we figured out influencers. We figured out influencers as how we can actually use that channel and make it sustainable, because the issue with influencers is that, if somebody posts something about you, you can have that massive viral spike. But then that viral spike dies down very sustain quickly, because we live in the era of social media, and we all have the attention span of an ant. So all those viral spikes, they go away. So the question was that, all right, fair enough. So you figured out influencers. How do you then make sure that this is sustained over time? So the two most crucial elements of our growth engine is the user-to-user referral program, and then the influence channel.
Okay, can you talk a bit about kind of the first one? I've seen many companies trying to do it unsuccessfully. A couple like Uber, I feel like in the very beginning they've done referral pretty well. But what about the second one, the influencer? How do you kind of make that part of the machine work consistently? Because I've also seen that it's at the top of your page as well, so it must be something. It's important. Realistic.
Look, we got really, really lucky because we stumbled upon it almost by accidentally at a very early stage. But that actually happened off the back of that very strong referral system that we had, because at some point in time, we just picked up that there were some users that would install Sweatcoin, and those users would invite like tens, sometimes hundreds of friends. And we were like, oh, look, something's really interesting going on here. So can we dig deeper? So we started to dig deeper, and we realized that those users would have some good followings on Instagram, and at that stage, TikTok wasn't there. And those were not like users with millions of followers, but those were 10,000 followers, 20,000 followers. So something that you would call like mid-size influencers. And at that stage, when we just started, some people remember it was relatively easy to monetize if you had like 500,000 followers. But if you've got like 10,000 followers on Instagram, that was pretty damn hard to make any money out of it, apart from just vanity. So lots of people would do likes and everything. Now with influencers, the biggest challenge typically is that if you want to work with a brand, and again, it's changing now that, the TikTok's got the kind of the influencer marketplaces and all this kind of work, and the, then YouTube and Instagram. But even a few years ago, it wasn't the case. So if you're an influencer, you end up just being in a situation, you are being contacted by an influencer agency that works on behalf of a brand, and they go like, oh, would you be willing to produce, some content for that brand ABC? And here's the, the guidelines that the brand ABC has. So you have to comply to those guidelines. Then you go back to the agency, and the content usually does not comply with everything. But there's a lot of back and forth. There's quite a laborious moments, quite annoying, frankly, if you're an influencer. And then you end up creating that, huge amount of mess that takes lots of time. Suppose that even if your content gets approved, you then have no visibility whether your brand has posted that content of yours. And even if they have, what kind of impact does it have? You end up being at their kind of, they are reporting those metrics to you. And then even if you see that you made a dent and your content produced some incredible level of reach, and the call to action, whatever the action is, install or purchase or anything, then even if you're supposed to be paid, that payment will probably come in like 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. So for an influencer, it's a very convoluted journey. So for us, what we just realized is that, look, we've got some people who clearly are like mid-size influencers. Can we create that, loop in such a way that A, they can see how many users they've brought in real time, and can we actually pay them within 48 hours? So what we ended up doing, we've created an in-app experience, which we call the Influencer Hub, which essentially is a very slick online marketing agency. And the easy thing for us is that when we get those, people coming in, when people kind of make successfully a certain number of invites, then all of a sudden that new experience opens up, and they can become a Sweatcoin influencer.
Is that
okay? Like a tiering system.
By doing so, we've exploited some inefficiencies in the channel. And remember, that was a long time ago. We're talking 2017, 2018. And we created an opportunity for people with followings anywhere between 10 and 100,000, which like in the influencer world is not a lot. But we were there for them, and they paid back. And we keep on, doubling down on this market right now. I mean, it's, of course, right now, it's very, very different. Yeah. All of it. But by now, we are much more experienced. We've got a big team working on the influencer channel. And it's a very interesting market, how it evolves. Yeah.
But I'm wondering how the two sort of ingredients of your machine, how do you adapt them to keep building user bases across geographies and borders? And this is very interesting for us because we're Europe Builds, right? As a podcast, we're very preoccupied with how do you transcend these borders when you build a project, and you did it quite successfully. So what's the sort of key ingredient there?
Well, it's a great question, and I don't think that we can be a role model for that, quite frankly, because we always prioritize simplicity over anything else. So even now, even though we do have people working and spread across like 35 plus countries around the world, but we still don't have local offices. And sometimes it can be a disadvantage. Like, for example, when we launched in Brazil, we made a few mistakes not recognizing that specific kind of local aspect, that, local mentality.
Right.
So now, of course, we're trying to make adjustments for that, but we are far from perfect. So I think that one thing I would say is that you always want to be looking for that, the kind of the ideal, balance in between trying to overcomplicate things and trying to cut too many corners. And I think that early days we probably did the latter. Because, on one hand, obviously, you launch a new country, and if you are going to go ahead, set up a new office there and hire people, then before you know it, you're 1,000 people, and this is like impossible to manage. The level of complexity is crazy.
And do you think that you could have built this ultra growth product just having Europe in mind?
No, I don't think so. Look, Europe is always the most competitive. And like, when we launched, we initially launched in the UK, and the second market we launched into was the US. And the mentality there was that if we can make it there, you can make it anywhere, like Sinatra, the song.
Yeah, exactly.
And the idea was that basically then the next stop for us was the EU. Because if we can make a product that works in those countries, then it's so much easier to scale. But after a while, those markets are so much more competitive, and whatever copycats, because for a very long time we didn't have any competitors, because we were very, very fortunate that in our business, this term escape velocity, you need to get to a certain place where you already have enough users to be attractive to some of those brands. And if before you actually reach that scale, you would still have some costs. And unless you're able to fundraise really, really well, you will still struggle. So up until a certain moment in time, we had lots of potential copycats turning up here and there, but they would all die. But in Europe, because the users are more affluent, there could be some individual pockets of, there are some countries and there are some kind of copycat competitors that could be active in one or two countries in Europe. But it's much harder for them to maintain that in countries where the LTV, the amount of money generated per user is substantially different. So essentially their product works in a particular unit economics, and that unit economics is dictated by the affluence of a particular market.
Right.
Okay, that's interesting. And I have a numbers question. What was the point where you actually said this is becoming an ultra high growth consumer internet product?
Well, probably when we hit the first million. And we because before that it was, as you do, when we were just starting, I spoke to lots of smart people, and they said, look, you can maybe pique some investor interest once you get to the first 100,000. And we got to the first 100,000. I started, just meeting investors, and the reception was less than encouraging. So essentially all the 100 people I spoke to, they were at best great idea, but it's not for us. To this is never going to work because this is bullshit. It's just you guys are crazy. You're insane. And don't talk to me about that. And so we were 100,000 and 200,000, 300,000, and 500,000. And basically nothing was happening. And then when we hit that first million, this is where people started approaching us. Because the most progressive investors at this stage, they were building lots of, tools to spot the up and coming projects that would show some good numbers. So we got approached by a few, and this is how we got our first and the only funding round that we currently have. So we got to $1 million, and then by the time we got that term sheet on the table, I think we were already 3. And while we were signing the term sheet and getting the money, I think that we got from 3 to 6. So
wow.
And this is where it was this is where it created that next level of anxiety. Okay, can we maintain this? Because of course at that stage we couldn't, because whenever you're having a viral product, and right now you look around, there's plenty of meme products.
Yeah.
A couple of years ago, there was Be Real. All the rage. You probably remember that it's a killer of, the TikTok killer and everything. And there's always this thesis that for every generation, there's got to be its new social network.
Right.
And initially it was Facebook, and then it was a Facebook's alternative. That was Snapchat. And then there was the Snapchat's alternative, which is TikTok. So some people are saying that every 5 years there's got to be a new product that would come into a market. That the problem is that whenever you have a super viral product, then that virality at some point ends.
It's going to spike.
You cannot go on forever unless you're like a very strong network effects, unless you're the like of Facebook. Then back in 2008, 2009, 2010. So whenever you're creating that huge viral spike, there's always that level of anxiety when it's going to end.
Right.
Because every single viral spike results in a correction. Because you cannot grow exponentially forever.
Yeah.
It's just the nature of it. It's just the nature of the geometric progression, because it just, scales up too quickly, too fast.
Yeah. So then the real anxiety is, how do we keep it up, right? I think a very important element here, and clearly you're quite good at it, is storytelling about your product, right? Apart from the experience, is to keep sort of rehashing the story of what you're doing, getting it to the users across the world. Clearly you're quite good at telling us the story of Sweatcoin. So I'm wondering, how important was this sort of storytelling in building this high growth product and making it also something that will have a sustainable user base and not just a fad like the one you described, or just a spike in our ants' attention span?
Well, firstly, thank you for your compliments, but I don't think that we are as good at storytelling as we are at building product. Because our product was our story. Sometimes they say we will build it, they will come, and then people say actually it never works this way, or almost never works this way. And people who like to think that way, they are like kind of delusioned. Well, in our case, our product was the story, because we essentially outsourced that storytelling to our users. Because quite frankly, this is the story of Sweatcoin is you said elevator pitch at the very beginning, but when I do meet someone who is not in the tech circles, and I don't need to speak about the business model, how the whole thing works, then this is the fastest elevator pitch ever I had to tell. It's 5 seconds. So essentially we pay you for being physically active. That's it. That's all. And that makes everybody, your grandma or your grandma's grandma, kind of get it straight away. And that approach has its positives and negatives. Now, the positive is that the story and the idea is so straightforward, it's so simple, that people go like, shit, how did I not think about that myself?
Okay.
The negative there is that because the narrative is so simplistic, it's so easy, and people tend to retell it, then at some point in time, you lose control of the narrative.
Yeah.
Because if you have to tell that story yourself over and over and over again, then the negative is that you have to invest a lot of effort into crafting the story, telling the story, finding the right channel to tell the story, crafting it in such a way that people will understand. And it's very hard. And oftentimes for startups, it's just, you don't have enough resources, you don't have enough time. And that's why brand building, it takes lots of effort. So we were very fortunate that our story was so simple. But then the downside, as I said, is you have much less control of the message.
Yeah.
I'm actually very curious of kind of what have been the misinterpretations of this message when your users have been telling the story.
Look, we were very specific. We magically, miraculously, and I don't even know who came up with it and when. That one that probably merits an internal investigation. But we came up with this magic formula. It pays to walk.
Okay.
This is our message. This is our motto. This is our slogan. This is whatever you call it. And the funny one is that it pays to walk can be taken literally, or it can be understood like metaphorical. Because of course it pays to walk. It makes sense for you to walk because it pays you back in the broad sense of the word. But also it tells you exactly what this product does. It pays you to walk. And I think that was one of the wonderful things to tell a story. However, the downside of it, as always, is that some people take it too literally. And some people onboard into Sweatcoin thinking somehow that they're going to walk for about 7 days and then they will be able to earn an iPhone in 7 days of walking.
Just make a salary out of walking.
And this is something like, yeah, no, fair enough. But, okay, guys, how literally do we want to be here? So I think it's a little bit of that, the edge and the kind of the swords that you have to walk.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting, yes.
And managing the expectations for sure. Like the more you talk about it, the more kind of, I have a question in mind, which is how transferable is kind of this ultra high growth product into other industries? I know you've been involved kind of with investments in digital health and technology in many different geographies. And I'm just very curious about whether this is translatable or not.
Well, look, I mean, a few different apps and businesses try to use something similar. Again, I think lots of it is translatable. I'm not sure whether you can take the whole concept and just, import it somewhere and copy paste. I think that, again, at the end of the day, what's fundamental is that the whole kind of growth engine should be very closely linked. It should be essentially intrinsic to the user experience that you've built. Because the moment you've got that user experience and then you have an add-on on it, on top of it, that has become slightly unnatural. And then, of course, there are different like referral systems, referral programs. Like, remember all that, this famous example of PayPal, early days with Peter Thiel and Reid Hoffman, and when they would pay people to onboard. So I think there's a different snippets that you can use across the board. And lots of people, especially in the SaaS space, lots of people are talking about the PLG motion, which is the product-led growth. So I think all of that does make sense. Your product needs to sell. And that happens mostly because that, the traditional paid acquisition channels, people got very, very excited about it early days, only to find out that nobody's going to give them free lunch. Facebook and TikTok and, these guys will want everything to themselves. So the reality there is you cannot really scale your business through paid acquisition only, unless you have a very, very high LTV and or very high revenue retention.
Right.
And even that, Facebook and, Facebook will do everything, or Google, they will do everything just to screw you in terms of the amount of money you'll have to pay. Because paid acquisition doesn't scale that well. So you have to find some other ways, the cheaper ways to grow. And that product-led growth is one of them. The product has to sell itself. It's a damn good idea. I really, really like it.
So we've talked a lot about the products and the user experiences, about the high growth consumer strategies, different geographies, but really a lot of what matters in all of this journey is the people that do all of it, right? The founders themselves and the teams that they put together. So we usually close our episodes by sort of taking it back to the founder and asking, through this journey, what did you think was the most important trait that a founder should have to build something successful, but particularly to build something that will have an ultra high growth sort of consumer aspect to it?
Yeah, look, I mean, you need to be super stubborn in terms of, because more often than not, you have to face it, like, to every, like the second, third time founders, they know it. First time founders, I mean, you need to be ready that the number of failures you're going to have is going to be at least 10 times the number of successes. And, actually, if you're building something very new, then it's going to be even worse. So you'll end up being wrong all the time. And that takes lots of balls to basically being wrong all the time and keep on fighting. So yes, definitely that resilience. I wouldn't, tenacity, whatever you call it, this resilience. It's being able to say no in the face of kind of defeat. But maybe the other one is, it's almost like something that helps you a little bit with that, is some people take themselves too seriously. And what I mean by that is that, like, oh man, my product is the best in the world and it's going to kill it and we're going to go out and just kill it. And then you just realize that, look, you know nothing. And people have done it and they did it better than you. And, You just made a mistake again and again and again. And I think that, it's almost like don't put too high expectations on yourself, because you know nothing, literally. The best thing you can do is keep on fighting and keep on learning. I think lots of people, and this is something I find especially in the Valley, and there's lots of people I absolutely admire and adore, and it's great. And I think that the culture is in Silicon Valley is amazing. I think one trait that most people share there is that they take themselves way too seriously. And I think sometimes you just need to be a bit. And again, people sometimes say, "Oh, humble and everything." I think humble is not taking yourself too seriously. It's not to say that you should respect yourself. It's not to say that you should be demeaning or something. But just relax and just do what you have to do, and you'll get lucky, and hopefully the timing will be right and you'll succeed.
Makes a ton of sense. I like the stubbornness, because actually stubborn, I 100% can see how all the founders I've met so far have never taken no for an answer. Because you're, as you said, you try to raise from 100 investors, and the first 100 investors said no.
Okay, lovely to have you chat with us today. I think being stubborn also
Thank you,
something
Anton.
that a runner needs to have. So I think there's a parallel. There's parallels definitely between being a runner and being a founder. You need consistency, regular exercise, staying stubborn along the way, not accepting defeat. So I think and it's a marathon. When you build a product, especially with high growth, it's definitely a marathon. Thank you so much, Anton, for being with us today for this chat. Thank you to everyone tuning in. We're going to be back very soon with another episode of Europe Built, highlighting yet another story by an incredible European founder.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Europe Builds, where we show that the European ecosystem is no longer an underdog story.
If you liked our episode and want to hear more, follow Europe Builds on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Born's YouTube channel.